February 19th, 1945, a Marine steps onto the black volcanic sand of Iwo Jima, carrying 70 pounds of fuel on his back. He has 4 minutes to live, not 4 hours, not 40 minutes, 4 minutes. Out of 380 flamethrower operators who landed on that island, only 18 walked off alive. This is why they called it the best weapon and the worst weapon the Marines had. And their story is darker than you think. When you talk about the Pacific War, people mention Guadalcanal. They mention Okinawa. But Iwo Jima was different. 8 square miles of volcanic rock in the middle of nowhere. Tiny, insignificant looking. But in 1945, it became one of the most valuable and one of the bloodiest pieces of ground in the entire war. The Japanese knew the Americans were coming, so they went underground. 11 miles of tunnels, bunkers connected like a maze, machine gun nests that supported each other from every angle. And when the Marines landed, they walked into hell. But there was one weapon that could break through, one weapon that terrified the Japanese more than anything else, and using it was a death sentence. Let's start with why Iwo Jima even mattered. It's a tiny island, 8 square miles, sitting between the Mariana Islands and mainland Japan. Nothing on it, no resources, no ports, just rock and volcanic ash. But location made it critical. By early 1945, American B-29 Superfortress bombers were flying missions from bases in the Marianas, Saipan, Tinian, Guam, hitting targets across Japan. But the route passed directly over Iwo Jima, and the Japanese had radar stations there, fighter aircraft there, early warning systems there. They could track every bomber flight, intercept them, shoot them down. Even worse, B-29s flying back damaged, low on fuel, engines failing. They had nowhere to land. It was 1,500 miles back to the Marianas. A lot of crews didn't make it. They ditch in the ocean, pray for rescue. Most drowned. If the Americans could take Iwo Jima, everything changed. Fighter escorts could be based there. P-51 Mustangs protecting the bombers all the way to Japan and back. Damaged bombers could make emergency landings, and missions could be launched for much closer, carrying heavier bomb loads, hitting more targets. The Japanese understood this perfectly. They knew Iwo Jima was going to be invaded. They'd watched what happened at Tarawa, Saipan, Peleliu, and they'd learned. Surface defenses didn't work. American naval gunfire and airstrikes would destroy them all before the first Marine even hit the beach. So this time, they tried something different. They went underground. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi was put in charge of the defense. Experienced officer, smart, realistic. He knew he wasn't going to win. He didn't expect to survive. But his goal wasn't victory. It was time. Bleed the Americans for every inch of ground, make them pay so heavily that the invasion would be delayed. Give Japan more time to prepare for the inevitable assault on the home islands. American intelligence estimated about 13,000 Japanese defenders on Iwo Jima. They were wrong. There were over 21,000, and almost all of them were underground. 11 miles of tunnels had been carved through the soft volcanic rock. Bunkers, pillboxes, machine gun positions, artillery emplacements, storage rooms, command posts, all connected, all reinforced. Some positions were so deep that American naval shells couldn't reach them. Kuribayashi had every inch of the island pre-measured. Artillery batteries were already zeroed in on the beaches. Firing lanes were calculated to overlap. Positions were designed to support each other from multiple angles, with fallback routes through the tunnels. There were no front lines, just a network of interlocking defenses that could attack from any direction. When the Americans launched the invasion on February 19, 1945, they did what they always did. Days of naval bombardment. Battleships and cruisers pounding the island. Airstrikes dropping thousands of tons of bombs. By the time the first wave of Marines hit the beach, the entire coastline looked like the surface of the moon. But almost nothing had been destroyed. The bunkers were underground. The tunnels were untouched. The defenders were waiting. The first wave of Marines landed and found themselves wading through loose volcanic ash, black sand. It wasn't like normal sand. It was more like trying to run through gravel. Boots sank in with every step. Vehicles got stuck. You couldn't dig in for cover because the ash just collapsed back in. But for the first hour, it was quiet. No gunfire, no resistance, just eerie silence. Marines were landing wave after wave, getting organized, trying to move up the slope toward the airfield. Thousands of men packed onto the beaches. And then Kuribayashi gave the order. All at once, every hidden position opened fire. Machine guns, mortars, artillery, all pre-sighted, all perfectly aimed. The beach erupted. Marines were hit in clusters. No cover, nowhere to hide. The volcanic ash wouldn't stop bullets. Men fell in groups. Medics couldn't reach the wounded. The surf turned red. But somehow, inch by inch, the Marines pushed forward, taking devastating casualties. And as they moved inland, they started to understand just how bad this was going to be. Every time they thought they'd cleared a bunker with grenades or satchel charges, they'd move forward and Japanese troops would reappear behind them, shooting from positions that were supposed to be secure, using the tunnel network to move underneath the Marines, popping up in areas that had already been cleared. There were no front lines, no safe zones. You could be shot from any direction at any time. And the biggest problem? The pillboxes. These weren't just holes in the ground. They were reinforced concrete fortifications with walls several feet thick, small firing slits, machine guns inside, positioned so they could support each other. If you attacked one, another would have a clear shot at you from the side. Some were so well camouflaged, you could walk right past them without seeing them. At least, not until they opened fire. To clear a pillbox, you had to get close, really close. Crawl under fire. Throw grenades or satchel charges through the firing slit. But most of these fortifications were built with interior walls, zigzag designs, so the blast wouldn't reach the whole interior. You could blow one up, and the troops inside would still be alive, just deeper in the structure. Grenades didn't work. Satchel charges didn't work. Rifle fire definitely didn't work. The Marines needed something else, something that could reach into those bunkers and kill everything inside. That's when the flamethrower became essential, and that's when the real nightmare began. The M2-2 flamethrower was standard issue for U.S. Marines in World War II. It wasn't complicated, just brutal. You had two large cylindrical tanks strapped to your back, filled with napalm, thickened gasoline that stuck to everything it touched. A smaller center tank held compressed nitrogen to pressurize the system. Connected to the tanks was a long metal wand with an ignition system at the tip, either electric spark or white phosphorus. Pull the trigger, fuel sprays out, igniter lights it, and you get a stream of burning gel shooting forward. But here's the problem. Your effective range was only about 20 yards, maybe 25 if you had a tailwind. That's it. Closer than grenade range, much closer than rifle range. You had to get within spitting distance of the enemy position. And your fuel capacity? 7 seconds. Total. That's all you got from a full load, which meant short, controlled bursts, 1 or 2 seconds at a time, and then you were empty. You had to retreat, refuel, and try again. So the job was simple in theory. Get within 20 yards of a fortified position filled with enemy soldiers who know exactly what you're going to do to them, use your 7 seconds of fuel as effectively as possible, then get out before they kill you. In practice, it was a death sentence. The moment you strapped on those 3 tanks, 70 pounds of weight on your back, you became the #1 target on the battlefield. The tanks were distinctive, huge, visible from hundreds of yards away. Every Japanese defender knew what a flamethrower operator looked like, and they knew what would happen if they let you get close. So the second you started moving forward, every rifle, every machine gun, every mortar crew focused on you exclusively. Forget everyone else. Kill the flamethrower operator before he gets in range. The rest of your squad would try to suppress the enemy. Rifle fire, machine gun fire, anything to keep heads down long enough for you to close the distance. But with fortified positions, overlapping fields of fire, and defenders who knew they were about to burn alive if they didn't stop you, suppression didn't work well. You were exposed, slow, carrying 70 pounds, trying to cover 20 yards of open ground under concentrated fire. Most operators didn't make it. 4 minutes. That was the average life expectancy of a flamethrower operator on Iwo Jima once they went into action. Not 4 minutes per battle, 4 minutes total, from the time you first used your flamethrower in combat until you were killed. Out of 380 operators deployed on the island, only 18 survived. That's a 95% casualty rate, the highest of any specialty in the entire battle. But the danger wasn't just from enemy fire. The weapon itself was terrifying to use. 70 pounds of highly flammable fuel on your back. One stray bullet hitting the tanks, one piece of shrapnel, and you'd go up like a torch. Some operators took hits to the tanks and survived. The fuel didn't always ignite, but when it did, there was no saving them. Malfunctions were common. The ignition system would fail, the fuel line would clog, the pressure would drop, and you'd be standing there 20 yards from an enemy bunker with a weapon that wouldn't fire, wearing a giant target on your back. Wind was another problem. A sudden gust could blow the flame stream sideways toward your own troops, toward yourself. There were reports of operators accidentally setting themselves on fire when the wind shifted mid-burst. And if all of that wasn't bad enough, being captured was worse, much worse. Flamethrower operators weren't treated like regular prisoners. The Japanese viewed them as war criminals. Burning people alive wasn't considered honorable combat. It was murder. If you were captured with a flamethrower, execution on the spot was the best outcome you could hope for. But usually, it wasn't quick. There are accounts from Iwo Jima of operators being pulled into caves alive. Their squad mates could hear them screaming for days, unable to help, unable to reach them, just listening as the captured Marine was tortured to death slowly. One Marine's flamethrower misfired as he approached a cave entrance. Before his squad could react, 2 Japanese soldiers rushed out, grabbed him, and dragged him underground. For 2 full days, his squad mates heard him screaming from inside that cave. They tried to get him out, couldn't. They tried to end it quickly with grenades, couldn't reach him. They just had to listen. So everything about this weapon was a nightmare. The extreme danger of carrying it, the near certainty of being killed, the horror of what it did to enemy soldiers at close range, and the knowledge that if you were captured, your death would be slow and unimaginably painful. But despite all of this, the flamethrower was one of the only weapons that actually worked on Iwo Jima. Grenades couldn't clear the pillboxes. Satchel charges couldn't reach deep enough. Artillery couldn't penetrate the fortifications. Only fire could. When a flamethrower operator got close enough to fire into a bunker, the results were absolute. The burning napalm would splash inside, stick to everything, and ignite. Temperatures would spike to over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The fire consumed all the oxygen. Even soldiers not directly hit by the flames would suffocate or die from heat exposure. Some operators used a tactic called a wet burst. They'd fire a few quick shots without igniting, just soaking the target with fuel. Then they'd follow up with a lit burst to ignite everything at once. It increased the chance of completely neutralizing the position without survivors who could reappear later from the tunnels. But using the weapon meant seeing, hearing, and smelling the results at close range. There's no way to sugarcoat this. Operators had to live with what they did. Many suffered severe psychological trauma after the war. Some never recovered. The Marines needed a better solution, a way to deliver flame into those bunkers with more protection for the operator. That's when they brought in the tanks. The M4A3R3 Sherman flame tank looked like a regular Sherman from the outside. Same hull, same armor, same tracks. But instead of a 75mm gun in the turret, it had a flamethrower system. The tank carried about 300 gallons of napalm, compared to 4 gallons for the backpack unit, and it could shoot flames up to 100 yards, 3 times farther than the M22. The system was pressurized with compressed air, and the fuel was thickened enough that it shot out in a coherent stream, not a spray. When a Sherman flame tank fired, it looked like a solid river of fire extending from the turret. Everything in its path ignited. Bunkers, caves, vegetation, anything. These tanks operated in coordination with infantry and regular gun tanks. The flame tanks would suppress fortified positions while the infantry moved up. Gun tanks would provide covering fire and deal with any anti-tank threats. It was combined arms warfare at its most effective. But the same problems applied. Once a flame tank opened fire, every Japanese defender on that part of the island knew exactly where it was. And they knew what was inside: hundreds of gallons of fuel. Anti-tank guns, magnetic mines, satchel charges, anything that could crack the armor and ignite that fuel became top priority. Tank crews operating flame Shermans had one of the most dangerous jobs on the island. Regular Sherman crews already faced significant risks: thin armor, gasoline engines that caught fire easily, ammunition storage that could explode if penetrated. Flame tank crews had all those risks plus 300 gallons of napalm. But despite the danger, flame tanks were devastatingly effective. They could approach pillboxes that infantry couldn't reach. They could pour fire into cave entrances from a distance. They could sweep entire defensive lines with sustained bursts that no fortification could withstand. On Mount Suribachi, the iconic volcanic peak on the southern tip of Iwo Jima, flame tanks played a crucial role in clearing the Japanese defenders from the slopes. The mountain was honeycombed with tunnels and caves, all interconnected, all mutually supporting. Infantry assaults kept getting pinned down by machine gun fire from positions that couldn't be seen until you were right on top of them. Flame tanks changed that. They'd approach a cave entrance, fire a sustained burst deep into the tunnel system, then move to the next position while infantry followed up. The Japanese defenders had two choices: stay inside and burn, or run outside where Marines were waiting. By the time the famous flag was raised on top of Suribachi on February 23, 1945, flame weapons had cleared most of the mountain's defenses. But the battle for Iwo Jima was far from over. The northern part of the island was even worse. The terrain was more broken, more rugged, with more caves and better fortified positions. This is where Kuribayashi had concentrated his best troops and his headquarters, and this is where the fighting became truly brutal. Marines would advance a few yards, clear a position, move forward, and immediately come under fire from another bunker they hadn't seen. Progress was measured in feet per day. Casualties mounted relentlessly. Flamethrower operators, both backpack and tank crews, were working constantly. There was no rest. Every position required fire to clear. Every cave needed to be burned out. It was slow, methodical, horrifying work. The Marines developed tactics specifically for Iwo Jima. Small teams would approach fortified positions under covering fire. Demolition men would place satchel charges to create breaches. Flamethrower operators would fire into the openings. Then infantry would move in to confirm the position was clear and make sure no one came back. It worked, but the cost was staggering. By the time the battle officially ended on March 26, 1945, over 6,800 Americans had been killed. Nearly 20,000 were wounded. Almost all the Japanese defenders, over 18,000 men, were dead. Only about 200 surrendered. And of those 380 flamethrower operators who landed on February 19th, only 18 walked off the island alive. The flamethrower was called the best weapon and the worst weapon the Marines had on Iwo Jima, and both descriptions were accurate. It was the best because nothing else could clear those fortifications. Grenades bounced off. Satchel charges couldn't reach deep enough. Rifles and machine guns were useless against reinforced concrete. Only fire worked. But it was the worst because using it meant almost certain death. A 95% casualty rate, 4 minutes of life expectancy. The knowledge that if you were captured, your death would be slow and horrific. The psychological burden of what the weapon did at close range. All of it made the flamethrower the most dreaded assignment in the Marine Corps. The men who carried those weapons knew the odds. They knew they probably weren't coming back, but they did it anyway, because their squads depended on them, because the mission required it, because there was no other way to break through those defenses. After Iwo Jima, the flamethrower remained in U.S. military service for decades. It was used in Korea, in Vietnam, in countless smaller conflicts, but it was never used in conditions as brutal as Iwo Jima. Never again did operators face such concentrated fire, such well-prepared defenses, such impossible odds. The island itself served its purpose. B-29 crews used it for emergency landings throughout the rest of the war. Over 2,400 bombers made emergency stops on Iwo Jima, saving an estimated 27,000 aircrew lives. P-51 fighters based there escorted bombing missions all the way to Japan. The strategic value was real, but the cost was almost unimaginable. For every square yard of Iwo Jima captured, an American was killed or wounded. It was the only battle in the Pacific where American casualties exceeded Japanese casualties, and a significant portion of those casualties came from the men carrying flamethrowers, the weapon that everyone needed but nobody wanted to use. The 18 operators who survived carried their experiences for the rest of their lives. Some spoke about it. Most didn't. What do you say about watching your friends die one after another doing the same job you somehow survived? What do you say about the things you saw, the things you did, the sounds and smells that never quite left you? The flamethrower is largely retired now. Modern militaries have moved on to other weapons: thermobaric rockets, napalm strikes from aircraft, precision munitions. The backpack flamethrower, that 70-pound death sentence, is obsolete. But on Iwo Jima in 1945, it was essential, and the men who carried it paid the price.